Alrighty, and we are recording. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Yankus. I am a senior instructional designer at Rutgers Teaching and Learning with Technology, which is a unit within the Division of Continuing Studies. And you are here probably because you want to learn a little bit about lecture capture. Perhaps you yourself are an educator or a board member or an administrator who may be giving tips and tricks to educators on how to produce media content to share online. I usually teach this workshop within the confines of higher education for university instructors at Rutgers, but a lot of the tips and tricks that we're going to talk about today apply to anyone, whether it's a 4-year-old or a 55-year-old, whatever the case may be. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of today's workshop, I wanted to just share a little bit with you about who I am and where I come from. I work for, as I mentioned, the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies. We are the central continuing education unit at Rutgers and serve a very wide range of learners from ages 4 to over 100 years old. That photo you're seeing there is where I normally work prior to COVID-19. It's the Lifelong Learning Center in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and we host a lot of different classes there for a very wide range of learners. Part of our audience is part of our Lifelong Learning Institute, where we host classes for senior citizens to come in and just engage with each other and learn a little bit about whether it be history or art or whatever it is. We run a bunch of different classes, and my unit in particular supports distance learning for faculty, staff, and students and beyond at Rutgers. So in particular, my area of specialty is academic video production and non-credit course design, which has led me into the partnership that New Jersey School Board Association has entered into with Rutgers. So if you are a board member and have had to take any mandated trainings and have been taking the newly fully online mandated trainings, you can thank me and Marcia Levine for that, who is also on this call today. If you have any questions during this presentation, you can enter questions into the chat, or you can use the raise hand function and Marcia will flag me down to handle any questions that might come in during the talk. I'll also do a Q&A at the end, and hopefully there is some time to maybe have a conversation about perhaps a particular use case that you're experiencing and how we can help. So again, I mentioned you're here today to learn a little bit about lecture capture. So we're going to run through some of the following objectives in this presentation. We're first going to talk about the pre-production plan and select tools to help you record your lecture. So perhaps I'm going to assume you're all in the role of an educator. You may or may not be, but I'll refer to you as one. Perhaps you're designing a lesson plan and you're looking to produce a piece of multimedia content to share with your students, and you want to figure out the best way to go about that or to help a fellow colleague do the same. We're also going to talk about maximizing your recording environment to establish effective on-screen presence, which what I mean by that is making sure that you're engaging on camera and some of the ways that we can mitigate the robotic drone voice that some of us can slip into if we get a little nervous when getting on camera for the first time. We're also going to talk about some common accessibility issues in educational videos and how to make videos accessible for all learners. Spoiler alert there, that's going to be a lot about captioning and producing a transcript. Any multimedia content that we produce, we want to make sure that whether it is a hearing impaired student or someone watching your video on their phone while they're outdoors and can't hear, that we make sure that that content is accessible. And finally, just a brief talk about how we can try to make some of these videos engaging, right? And so that it's not just a plain boring voiceover PowerPoint. What can we do to make this a little bit better and make our academic video content next level? So part one, pre-production considerations. And what I mean by that is, what are the things we should think about before we even press record? The first being that usually when we talk about this, there are two styles of academic video content. The first being talking head. So if you're seeing my face right now on WebEx, that is a talking head video. I am a head that is talking and delivering material. And this is the typical format for a lot of lecture videos that we do in higher ed, but also, again, can apply in K-12 as well. So this is one of the methods we use, and that would just be having the instructor on camera delivering information. versus or accommodate it with a screen capture video, which would be a demonstration style video that is a guided walkthrough of something, right? So if it's not relevant to be looking at the teacher's face in that given moment, and perhaps there is a website you want to demonstrate how to use to your students, perhaps there's an activity being implemented in a class that the teacher wants to produce a quick 2-minute tutorial on how to use a tool online. Perhaps that teacher would then want to use a screen capture to deliver that information, and maybe in tandem with a talking head. So these styles are not exclusive from one another. They can be used together and edited together to use both a talking head and a screen capture, and we'll get into a little bit about how to do both of those. So here's an example of a talking head. I already pointed you to the live example, which is me, but this is just an example of some of the varying degrees of quality that, at least at Rutgers University, that we achieve here, right? So on the left is most likely going to be in current times what most educators will be doing, and that is a talking head recorded in an office, whether that be at home or in school, probably not in school, most likely at home at this point, but just an environment at home. So recording a video at home, and we'll talk about some ways to make that work and make it work well. The other examples you see are more higher production quality examples from our studio spaces that we have access to at Rutgers University. The one on the right, obviously being a pretty high production value, and that's through the use of a green screen. Obviously, I don't want to scare anyone away and say that that is required by any stretch of the imagination, but when we have the time to work through these and produce these videos, something on the right is certainly achievable. I very much acknowledge in present day, in the scenario we are in with COVID-19, it will more probably err towards what you're seeing on the left-hand side. All are good if done well, and we're going to talk about how to do these well, regardless of if you are recording in a studio or at home. And here's an example of screen capture. Again, on the right, you're just seeing a PowerPoint slide, right? So that can be in tandem with a talking head. So you can deliver information on camera and then cut to a slide and then cut back to talking head. On the left, you're seeing something we have at Rutgers called a glass board, which actually allows, again, that's a higher production value and probably not something we would be doing in the context of COVID-19, out a problem on a board and work through it on video. But most likely the case, we would be looking at something more so on the right of integrating a PowerPoint slide into a media presentation, or editing those together, or demonstrating something on screen. But these are just a few examples of some of the screen captures that we see often. So storyboarding, right? Before you get on camera, you want to think a little bit about what you're going to talk about on camera. I personally have a tendency to ramble on camera if I don't have a plan of some sort. That plan is sort of like outlining an essay. You just want to kind of map out the main talking points that you want to get to, and there is no one correct method to do it. I teach an academic video production course for Rutgers University, and when we get to storyboarding, I don't recommend one specific way to do it, because the main idea is that you are just taking the opportunity to map out what it is you want to deliver on camera. What talking points do you want to get to? What topics do you want to hit? What objectives do you want to make sure you meet in your video? So your storyboard should take form in the method that suits your planning style best. I personally just open up Microsoft Word and write out an outline, and then have that outline sitting next to me while I deliver my material. But in the class I teach, I've seen folks submit hand-drawn outlines where they actually think through what's going to be on screen in every second of the video, and they draw little pictures to kind of represent what they're planning for the first 15 seconds or the first 35 seconds or whatever it may be. So the main idea here is think about what you want to say before you get on camera and say it, and storyboarding is a great way to help you achieve that and help you just think through what it is that you want to say on camera. And that can take form in whatever method works best for you, depending on what kind of learner you are. Part two, equipment considerations. So you could put together the best storyboard in the world. You could thoughtfully sit down and map out exactly what you want to say and how you want to say it. But if you don't have the hardware to to help you achieve quality video recording, you're not going to get very far, right? So this is the part where we kind of consider what is in our arsenal right now, equipment wise. Now, you have a few different options available to you, right? Most of us these days do have a smartphone of some sort, whether that be an iPhone or an Android device or whatever it may be. Many of us have these available to us. And you would be surprised that if used well, those actually can produce a decent video. Now, I would not call that ideal, but it is available to you. And there are little things you can do, like recording in landscape mode this way, and making sure that your phone is propped up on a stable surface and that it is positioned well. That you can do to try to really make the quality. And the hardware itself built into an iPhone or any modern smartphone is usually good enough to capture a decent quality video. However, it's the execution of it that is where most people tend to come out with lackluster quality material. And I mentioned, a shaky camera or having a terrible angle that you're filming at. These little things, when you think about them, can really help you make a cell phone recording better. Obviously, better than using a cell phone would be using a webcam built in your computer. Not all of us may have a laptop or may not have a webcam built into our laptop. But if you do, a webcam quality tends to be decent, but you do want to be mindful of how old your device is. So if you are using a laptop from 2003, obviously your webcam quality is going to be a bit subpar, and you may find that your smartphone, if you have one, may actually produce better quality than your webcam does. I personally am using a MacBook Pro that is about 4 years old, and the quality is still pretty decent. But you just want to test these things and see what in your arsenal produces the best video quality. And finally, a standalone camera. Obviously, I throw that there as the best, but expensive and often unrealistic recommendation. We are not all videographers or have a camera at our disposal, but obviously a DSLR camera will record better quality than an iPhone or a webcam, perhaps. So really the main idea here is not to be intimidated by any of these recommendations, but just see what's available to you, test what's available to you, and figure out which is the best way to go, right? Does your webcam record a better quality video than your iPhone, or vice versa? Whatever it may be, test it and figure it out. Everyone kind of approaches this differently depending on what hardware they have available to them. And there are general tips we can think about to make it work, regardless of whether it's a phone or a laptop. So the other flip side of this, aside from just thinking about the video coming from a camera, we also have to think about the sound that our microphone is picking up, right? So the built-in microphones on a laptop, which again, you would obviously test before using, tends to be okay. And I say okay because the microphone I find to be a larger variable over the webcam. Usually the webcam is standard, it's positioned right above your monitor as mine is. It's usually a decent quality. That tends to be a more standard piece of hardware among a lot of different laptop models in terms of positioning and quality. Microphones, I have found, tend to be a little dicier in terms of where they are on a computer and the type of the sound quality that they pick up. A MacBook Pro is what I have, and it's a decent quality, but I do usually, when I'm presenting something I'm really making sure I make a good impression with, I will use a headset because I have tested and found that my headset produces a better audio quality than the internal microphone on my laptop. So you just want to be mindful of these things and just really think about what level of quality you are getting from your sound. If your students can't hear you, again, that great outline you produced is not going to mean much if your students are unable to hear what it is you're saying on camera. So same idea as the camera, just make sure you test everything that's available to you. Using a standalone microphone does tend to be better. So whether that takes form as a headset or whether that takes form as an external microphone that you've purchased, that tends to produce better quality. We'll talk a little bit about recording environment as well, but it's not just the hardware, it also has to do with the environment that you are recording in. So just food for thought. In terms of software, these are some of the programs that are available. I won't dive too much into this because I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of video editing and a specific tool, but I just want to make aware if you haven't heard of some of these tools, some of the different software that are available for video editing. Now, again, I want to acknowledge that we are not all videographers who spent years researching and studying media production and how to use a complicated Adobe product to edit. So I personally have an affinity towards Camtasia. Camtasia does have a license fee, so it may not be accessible to everyone, but it is a great tool for both recording your screen, recording your webcam and audio, and also editing it all in one place. It's really a great one-stop shop that I use very often and personally like. Though if you are looking for more of the free option, you can look towards iMovie on the Mac. So if you are using a Mac laptop, iMovie is typically pre-installed on that laptop before you buy it. So you should have iMovie installed on your Mac. There are also programs called Shotcut and DaVinci Resolve available. Those are also free. Do bear in mind that some of these programs vary in terms of learning curve. I personally find Camtasia and iMovie to be very simple, and I find Shotcut and DaVinci Resolve to have a little bit more of a learning curve to it. So just keep that in mind, that what you choose to edit your footage with of whatever it is that you're recording, there will be some lead time that you'll have to invest in learning how to how to edit the footage that you are capturing. And this is just kind of a list version of what you were just looking at. Camtasia is available with a free trial, and it does come at a heftier price tag of $169 with the academic discount. That is a one-time fee, so you would not be paying annually. Adobe Premiere Elements is kind of a scaled down version of the Adobe Premiere product itself, and that's available for $99. And then I mentioned before that the other three products I recommended there, iMovie, Shotcut, and DaVinci Resolve, are all completely free. So I alluded to this a few minutes ago, but part three is your recording environment. So we talked a little bit about hardware and software considerations, but we need to also think about where we are recording, right? Hardware is there to help execute the production, but where you are when you record is also incredibly important as well. Lighting is the first and very important consideration in your recording environment. You see that in my apartment here, I'm kind of relying on natural lighting here. It's helped me and hurt me throughout the day today because it's been kind of a cloudy and sunny day on and off here in the rolling hills of Piscataway, New Jersey. Relying on natural light can be a detriment to you sometimes. So there are days where I could just leave my windows open and I have great lighting in my apartment, but depending on the time of day and depending on the weather outside, relying on natural light is usually not ideal. I certainly don't consider my particular setup here an ideal recording environment. If I throw on my light here, you see that's changed the lighting. So I have the natural light from my windows is still on me, but I'm getting kind of a hot spot on my rather large forehead here that's coming at me from above because I have a light right above me in my living room here. So again, the main idea, same thing as when you're looking at your hardware and software, would be to test, test, and test, right? Check out different places in your home. You'll obviously want to think about echo. If you are in a carpeted room, that tends to be a little less echoey than a room with a lot of hard floors and sharp edges and corners and things like that. That will usually produce more of an echo and can affect your quality overall. So, whatever space is available to you, just, test and see what seems to be best for you. Lighting is obviously the first and very important consideration to take into account. You don't want to sit in the dark. You don't want to be washed out with the lighting behind you being too bright. You don't want to be washed out because that atmosphere behind you is too bright and then you're just getting a dark effect on your face. So you see some of these examples here. The presenter is showing up with a big shadow over them because they're being washed out from the sunlight behind them. So typically recording in front of a window is not ideal, but again, just test the different environments you have and play with the lighting any kind of movable lighting that you have at your disposal. And the goal should be to make sure that you as the presenter are well lit and that your backdrop behind you is lit, but does not necessarily have to be quite as bright as you are, because you are the presenter and you are in the spotlight. Also, you don't want to be sitting in the dark and having a big light on your face. So they're just things to think about lighting when you are recording and setting up your recording environment. Before I get to, excuse me, sound, the other thing you want to think about with your recording environment, obviously, is what's going on around you, right? And what's happening behind you, what is behind you, and just the environment in general. So just some broader considerations about your environment. Amidst this COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, perhaps your family members who were not normally home all day are now currently with you all day. So obviously you want to record in a quiet space that is free of distractions and no one's running around in the background or screaming at you while you're delivering your presentation. So if possible, try to find a quiet space. And also think about the backdrop that's behind you, right? I mean, you see that I have my living room behind me. I probably would not want to record, with with a bar behind me or something like this. Anything that would distract the viewer, right? The goal is just keep things as neutral as possible, so nobody is distracted by a particular poster that is sitting behind you or on the wall or something behind you that would just detract from what's being delivered to them through the presentation. So just some more considerations to think about when reflecting on your recording environment. So testing your microphone, this would be something else obviously that you would want to do prior to starting the recording of your lecture or your presentation. Because if you see the second image there, that is our ideal levels, right? So on the left, that is an example. If you ever see those audio levels on the tool that you're using to record, that means that your audio is coming in way too loud. It's most likely going to sound muffled and your learner may not be able to hear you. It may sound disoriented or whatever it might be. Um, you the bottom level there, that is too low. So that means that you may find your learners, if you're recording at that level, they will be trying to turn up their audio on their computer. They may not be able to hear you. So your goal is to come in somewhere in the middle there and achieve that level of audio that you're seeing there. So you'll also want to make sure you test the positioning of your microphone to make sure that you're achieving an audio quality and an audio level that is beneficial to your learner. And if you are using a headset, you may have to play with the positioning of the microphone to make sure these levels are coming in ideally. If you're using an external microphone, whether that's your laptop built into your laptop or actually an external mic, you want to consider the positioning of that as well to make sure that you're not coming in too loud or too quietly. There are also ways to adjust levels as well with what the microphone is picking up. So framing, that's the next thing I want to chat about here. So for framing, you want to make sure that you are either front and center or perhaps strategically placed a little bit off to the side. So there's that concept of breaking things up into thirds and aligning yourself as such. When we think about framing, the main consideration I take into account is usually making sure that the presenter is able to sit up straight and look directly into the camera, and that the camera is eye level with the presenter's eyes. So what I mean by that is that we see often in on perhaps on Zoom calls or other meetings virtually that you've attended, these terrible angles, right, where the laptop is clearly on a desk below where the presenter is sitting, and you have this rather unflattering look up someone's nose or at their forehead, or half their face is cut off. Things like that, right? Those are things that we want to try to avoid when we are thoughtfully producing this academic video content. And we can do so by just calling attention to our framing and making sure that we take that time before we start recording to make sure we set up our device in a way that we are capturing a good angle of the presenter, so that, again, things like that don't take away from the presentation, right? So for me, I'm using a laptop. I mentioned before, I'm using a MacBook Pro, and I currently have it sitting on a box, and that box is elevating my laptop so that I am able to just look directly into the camera. If I did not do that, my laptop would be sitting below me, and I would be looking down at it, and again, perhaps cutting off parts of my face or shooting at me at a undesirable angle. So again, just food for thought. Make sure that you consider your framing and set yourself up in such a way that you are against a neutral backdrop in a quiet space, and that your your profile is on camera here, usually from like shoulder length and slightly below. That your head is captured in the frame. That your head is not weirdly cut off, and again that you're able to make direct eye contact with the camera straight ahead in front of you, rather than looking down or up or at some other angle at the camera. So part 4, learner considerations, right? We've talked a lot about our hardware, our software, setting up our environment, but what about the learner, right? Keys to learner engagement are obviously to be yourself, be concise, be clear, and break up your lecture material with visual cues to illustrate key concepts. Now, what do I mean by be yourself? I mean, try your best not to get hung up on a script or an outline that you've produced. We obviously spoke before about the importance of storyboarding and how important it is to kind of take time to figure out what it is you want to say, but that should not come at the sacrifice of your personality or your ability to tell a story on camera or share an example. Don't get too hung up on crossing every T and dotting every I. I often work with people in our production studio at Rutgers, and I work with incredible faculty who can stand in front of a room of 450 people and deliver a lecture, and they don't bat an eye, they don't break a sweat. But when it comes to sitting down in front of the camera and suddenly having to deliver it this way, everything kind of goes up in the air, and they don't know what they're saying, and they're writing out full scripts and making sure that they get everything just right because they feel like they're obviously they are being recorded, but like they're creating a record of their lecture, so they want to make sure it's perfect. Just give yourself those allowances to make a mistake, and just don't feel like you have to stop and re-record every little thing that every word you trip up on, unless it's absolutely taking away from the point of the video. It's okay to make mistakes, correct yourself, and move on within a certain level of discretion there, obviously. If I completely botch my lecture and I decide that I want to re-record it, then perhaps I would consider doing so. If I'm 15 minutes into delivering my lecture and recording it, and then I trip on one word, I'm certainly not going to want to stop and redo the whole thing, or edit that piece out. I would just correct myself, just like I would face to face, right? We can give ourselves the same allowances that we do when we're teaching in person when we record online. It's okay to trip on a word. It's okay to lie and tell a story and not get too hung up in the details of your outline or the details of a script that you've produced. And again, within those same lines of thinking, be concise and be clear. Make sure that your message is getting across. Again, if you're using a looser outline, just make sure that while you are telling stories or whatnot, that you're not missing the main point of what it is that you're trying to get across to your student. And then, as I mentioned, break up lecture material with visual cues to illustrate key concepts. Now that can take form, again, in a screen capture video, that can take form as a PowerPoint slide, as an image that you've edited in, or a clip of something, whatever it may be. The main idea is to break it up, right? You don't want your learners just to stare at a voiceover PowerPoint for an hour and a half. And here's an example of poor on-screen organization, right? So we want to be mindful of not just that we're breaking up the content, but that we are also taking the time to organize it in a thoughtful way. Obviously, this is an example of poor on-screen organization. There's a lot of cognitive overload happening here, a lot for the learner to take in that is all very poorly organized. So want to avoid cognitive load, keep text to a minimum. And this can be a general concept that you take not just for media production, but in general when you are putting together a slide deck for a face-to-face class or an online class. Use clear and simple images and supportive narration to make your point. You can highlight certain things or emphasize certain points, and just try to keep text on slides to a minimum, right? We don't certainly want to overload with an example like this, and if there are key definitions or key ideas that you want to get across in your video, that certainly would be something that qualifies as something you may include in a slide or something that you might include in some sort of visual that's happening on screen. but try not to get in the weeds of explaining too much and that video turns into a 45-minute video of just you talking to the screen and trying to get your way through a particular concept. And we can avoid all this. We can avoid cognitive overload and things of that nature by, again, being thoughtful in our production process when we're planning and thinking about what our video will achieve, what is our outcome, what is the goal of this video, how are we going to reach that goal, what points are we going to cover, and in what order, and just being thoughtful goes a long way in avoiding cognitive overload. Chunking and timing is another thing you'll want to keep in mind when you're producing these videos. Students will be engaging with videos in a very different way than they would be watching an educator deliver a lecture or a presentation or run a class in person. It's very different when you're engaging with this stuff online. Perhaps choose one or two key points to discuss per video. Try not to record a 75-minute video lecture and just throw that online. If a video is longer than 10 minutes, that's usually our dividing mark, and that number tends to scare people sometimes because they say, well, this is a 75-minute lecture. You're not being asked to make the 75-minute lecture 10 minutes long. You're just being asked to make logical breaks in your content and divide it into videos that maximize student engagement by not asking them to watch a very long video, and just do your best and be mindful of that as you're producing this to create logical breaks in your content and chunk it out again into about 10-minute pieces if possible. Again, that number always intimidates people, so I always give that as a target, but if it comes in over that, it is what it is. But just try to be thoughtful and mindful in chunking out your content. Also, accessibility is something to consider as well. I mentioned this at the beginning. Text transcripts should be available for content that you are producing and putting online. Captions should align with the video. Obviously, we need to make sure that content that we are loading up online is accessible to all learners, whether they are hearing impaired or not, or just engaging with your content in a loud environment where they can't necessarily hear the video. There are a lot of different ways that captioning can help a student, or having a transcript available to your student is super helpful. So if you do use YouTube, obviously every institution or every district has its own infrastructure technologically speaking. So for example, at Rutgers University, we have a service where we can upload videos to that runs it through machine captioning. And those machine captions usually come in around 70 to 90% accuracy, and then can be edited to make sure that we achieve 100% accuracy. If you don't have a tool like that at your district, YouTube does this as well. So you can upload a video to YouTube, make it unlisted, obviously, so that it's not just publicly available for anyone to find, and then it will run through machine captioning, and then those machine captions can then be edited. So making sure that our content is not just engaging and well produced, that's great, but we also have to make sure that it is accessible and that all students can engage with your content. So wrapping up, practice makes perfect. I'll spend a few minutes on some of these points, just making sure that you rehearse and pace yourself through your presentation. Obviously, the first time you do this, you'll start to get a groove. I've worked with a lot of people who are incredibly intimidated by this process at first, and then they find as they practice and as they get through a few of these and they gain kind of traction in this area of sitting in front of a computer and recording themselves talking, practice actually does make perfect. And I've also found working with people that reading up on this and reading up on how to do it is very different than actually doing it, right? So practice. Another tip that I have not personally done, but I've had a lot of people in my class say that this works well for them, is something as simple as taping a photo of somebody or something that makes you smile above your webcam. And that makes a difference for people. And it may not work for everyone. It doesn't work for me, but for some people this means a lot. So they could tape a photo of their dog or their child or their spouse or a family member or whatever it may be. It helps humanize the process, right, and remind you that you are recording for people. Those people may not be present in the room with you. You may be sitting in your home office by yourself in a quiet room recording this, but real people will be watching the content that you produce. And reminding yourself of that and perhaps pasting an image of something that makes you smile will bring you back to that place of humanizing what it is that you're doing. Obviously, consider your audience. Uh, you know, whether you're recording for if you're recording for 5-year-olds, you would obviously want to record in the tone and speed of delivery that you would when you were teaching them in person. Smiling obviously is super important. That's something I have a hard time with sometimes. I can get very wrapped up in the material that I'm delivering and neglect to sometimes stop to actually smile at the camera. But having that warmer presence can really make a big difference. Um, so yeah, just practice, test your recording environment, be mindful of the hardware and software that you're using. Allow yourself the time to figure out how to record a video. I know in this presentation we didn't dive too deep in the weeds of how to actually do this and how to actually record something. I can certainly give a few tips and tricks if that is something of interest that anyone expresses um, interest in. But just assess what's available to you, assess your environment, and make sure that the space you're recording in and the hardware that you are using to record provides a good space and overall to produce your recording, and that you are not on a grainy webcam with poor audio, because that will take away from the experience for the students and will most likely lead to students not achieving whatever goal it is that you set out to achieve by making the video. So we're at 4:10. I wanted to make sure we left about 15 minutes for any kind of Q&A. Um, I didn't see any questions come in the chat during this, so certainly we'll just open it up to questions at this point if anyone has any specific questions. I do see a comment that there's an interest in tips on how to actually make a video. So again, I really focused on the production process from a vague kind of high level here. But to get more into, since we do have time, to get more into the specifics of how to actually do this, I want to call your attention back to this slide when I spoke about content. Editing your content, these are some tools that are available. Again, I acknowledge every district is different and you may or may not have access to obtain a license for any of these paid tools. So if you were looking for the free model that does not require any financial stumbling blocks on your part, you can certainly look at one of these three: iMovie for a Mac, Shotcut, or DaVinci Resolve on a Windows device. Those certainly are free and can help you edit. Now, for the recording piece, right? So it's not just about editing the footage, it's also about actually finding a tool that works for you to record the video itself. So if you are using a Mac, you could use the QuickTime player. If you've used QuickTime before, QuickTime actually has a function in it where you can record your camera, and it also has a function to record your screen. So that allows you the freedom to record both of those, and that will produce a video file that you could then place into iMovie. So that is two different options available within QuickTime for the Mac to achieve that. There are also other screen recording tools available. If you just do a simple Google search, you'll find a bunch of different options. One that I've used before is called Screencast-O-Matic, and I'll write that in the chat so that I don't have the website off the top of my head, but I'll write the name of the tool in the chat for everyone. That's a great tool for recording your screen and recording your web as well. That will produce again, a video file that you can then plop into DaVinci Resolve, Shotcut, iMovie, Premiere, or somewhere else to actually edit the footage that you're producing. Now, you may not want or need to edit the footage that you're producing, and if that's the case, then using Screencast-O-Matic can just be a software that enables you to record, produce that MP4 video file, and then that could be uploaded to YouTube or elsewhere where you can to share it out with your students or on Google, wherever it is that you are sharing content with your learners. So Screencast-O-Matic is one example of many. There's another one called Loom. I think it's I believe it's Loom, Loom. That actually integrates into Google Chrome. And again, performs the same functions as Screencast-O-Matic, with allowing you to record your screen and record your webcam. So obviously, your goal is first to obtain a software that allows you to record yourself and record your screen, whether that's something like iMovie that's built right into your computer or something you go out and download. You first have to obtain some sort of software that's going to record your screen and record yourself. Again, I always mention Camtasia as kind of my favorite example because, as I said before, Camtasia, though it does come at a fee, is kind of a one-stop shop for all of that. So not only does it give you a space to record yourself and record your screen, but also it gives you a place to edit it as well. So it's a great option that is unfortunately put behind a wall of a licensing fee, but is a good option. But so to find something to actually record in, and then find software to record the video files that you are producing with your tool of choice. So I hope that added a little bit of clarity of how to actually make the video. And again, I listed those two specific tools that I just thought of off the top of my head. I did list those in the chat. So I hope that that's a good starting point for you. There was another question that came in. We are recording panel discussions on WebEx for high school students. Can the students easily view these if we post them on YouTube? So, okay, so you're using WebEx to host a synchronous panel discussion that's happening live, and then you're recording that WebEx meeting, and then wanting to make that WebEx meeting recording available. Okay, yeah, and that is certainly another way of capturing your screen and capturing your face on a camera, would be to do it over WebEx. It's not the best option because sometimes WebEx will, with WebEx, when you save a recording, you're saving a recording of a meeting, and that meeting is being hosted online, right? So that's where you might hit bandwidth issues, and then someone lags for a few seconds, and then all of that, and any lag is captured in the recording as well. So if someone is speaking and their audio drops for a second, and then they pick it back up, or it drops entirely, all of that's captured in the recording. So because of that, I wouldn't recommend WebEx as a go-to tool to produce media content for a course. But if you're looking to record a discussion that took place over WebEx, you certainly could do so. WebEx has recording functionality. And with WebEx, you can save it either to the WebEx cloud. Now, I don't know if this applies to every WebEx license. I can speak for Rutgers University, but with our instance of WebEx, when you record a meeting, it can be stored in the WebEx cloud, which already uploads it to a place that can be shared, right? So instead of it giving you a MP4 video file to put in YouTube, it can be uploaded. Recording can be immediately uploaded to the WebEx cloud, and then you can pull a link to share that WebEx meeting from the cloud. Alternatively, you can also download a WebEx meeting recording as an MP4 file. If you did want to put it on YouTube, you can just download the MP4 video file of the recording and then upload that to YouTube, or edit it in one of these tools here and then upload it to YouTube. So if you wanted to edit the meeting footage from WebEx in any way, you would want to download the MP4, use a video editing tool such as DaVinci, Shotcut, Camtasia, whichever, Premiere, and edit it there and then upload it to YouTube. So with WebEx specifically, you have two options: either upload it directly to the WebEx cloud, or to save it as a video file on your device to then be edited and uploaded to YouTube. I hope that answers your question. Okay, we're at 4:17. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Anyone want to unmute themselves and share a goal of theirs that something they're looking to record, and maybe talk through how to actually do it and achieve that? Going once, going twice. Everyone, I hope everyone was clear on, some of the concepts we went over. Again, I know this was pretty broad and kind of just a broad overview of what the media production process looks like. But I hope, it all made sense, and that you walk away with some ideas and some gears turning in your head about how you can either advise educators that you work with to do this, or to do it yourself, or, you know, so I'm going to throw my contact info up there, joseph.yankis@rutgers.edu. If you want to talk through a specific use case that you're working through, you can certainly shoot me an email, joseph.yankis@rutgers.edu. I've also included Marcia Levine's email address up there as well, mlevine@njsba.org. Certainly feel free to reach out to her with questions as well. Otherwise, I will hang out here for a few more minutes in case any other questions come in. But if not, I'd like to thank you for joining me today. This session I mentioned at the beginning has been recorded and will be available for you on the school board website where you access this recording today. If you want to look at it at a later date or view any of the sessions that you missed attending mine. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.